we were doing the test, we ripped it apart, of course, as usual. And during the debrief with the customer, I remember them saying to us, "Oh my gosh, how could you guys have done all this? We just passed compliance testing last week." And so now we have to explain the difference between compliance and security.
Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures. And this week I sit down with Errol Weiss, current Chief Security Officer for the Health-ISAC. Errol, how's it going?
Hey, Ron, it's so great to be here and sitting across the table from you like the old days.
I really appreciate coming on the show. Now, for folks who don't know, Errol and I work together at the National Security Agency. But rather than me tell you about that, Errol, why don't you tell us what you're doing and how you got here today?
Yeah, so the first gig out of college for me was with the National Security Agency. I had a couple of different jobs in there, and then I changed careers totally, went over to the InfoSec side of the house and started doing penetration testing there, which is where you and I crossed paths many years ago. Started doing the pen testing, and then left the NSA after a few years after that, and then got into the very early days of what has now become cybersecurity consulting and penetration testing and intelligence support for commercial companies. And those early days we were making it all up in the beginning, and now years later we're hearing about college courses on the radio. But the early days with SAIC and then other consulting places, and then that eventually led to some of the early work in the ISAC history. We can go into that later. And then basically made the jump to go work at Citibank and then Bank of America and then here at Health-ISAC.
So in many ways, you've had the career that I think a lot of people going into cyber want, right? They get to become proficient, right? They get to do the work, pen testing and whatnot, and next thing you know, you're running entire threat programs for Citibank and places like that. So
right.
So let's talk about let's wind that back. So mid-90s, we're at the NSA. We're in this place called the Pit. We've had Jeff Mann on the show as well.
Great. I almost wore my shirt too, but I didn't.
That's good. That's good. So tell me more. Like when we were doing the audits at the NSA for the various government customers, how is that relevant today for healthcare or the work you were doing for Citibank and whatnot?
Well, I still say today, like practical testing, penetration testing, it's still so important to evaluate what's been implemented versus what's desired. And it's still the debate that we have today about compliance versus security in so many ways. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'll say healthcare is so behind on cybersecurity spending. It's because we were so focused in the mid-90s on compliance and HIPAA regulations and not necessarily security. And I tell the story a lot about one of the tests that you might have been there with me during the NSA days. And we were doing the test, we ripped it apart, of course, as usual. And during the debrief with the customer, I remember them saying to us, "Oh my gosh, how could you guys have done all this? We just passed compliance testing last week." And so now we have to explain the difference between compliance and security. It's not just the check boxes.
So what, when you think about corporations, when you think about a single application, or you think about your personal life, like how do you balance what is security? How do you balance that walk between being compliant on paper or being secure?
Well, it's such a great issue because I think about my days at Citibank, where we literally had an army of people in cybersecurity, right? Over 1,000 people. By the time I got to Bank of America years later, they had over 2,000 people in security. And then we would meet with some of their large commercial customers and talk about cybersecurity to the bank customers. And they'd have maybe nobody in charge of cybersecurity or maybe a few people. And I felt really sorry for them. I didn't know how they were going to stay ahead of the issues that we were dealing with day in, day out, given all of the energy I saw going into it from the bank side. So it's an insurmountable task for so many people.
Now, when we're at the NSA, our customers, the DoD, the government,
right.
And the goal is like, don't give up the UFO secrets, right? Don't let the nuclear code slip away. And of course, we're going to do everything we can to prevent that, right? We're going to do cyber, we're going to do ComSec, we're going to do all this kind of stuff, right? Insider threat monitoring, et cetera, right? But when you go to the bank, what are the priorities of the bank? Like what are they trying to, obviously the money, but how did you just deal with risk when you were working at Citibank?
Yeah, I think that it's a very similar model, and maybe because there's so many former DoD types that are now in the commercial sector, but it's the same risk approach. It's understanding where are the things that need to be protected, where are the big gaps, where do you need to focus your energy, and address those, one at a time, and have mature programs around that to understand the risks and to accept changes, accept risk where you want to, and understand what you're accepting.
Now, Citibank's a pretty common brand. We're not trying to, it's your history here, right?
Right.
But look, New York City, worldwide footprint, your day-to-day job up there was 24/7.
It
right?
felt like it a lot of times.
So what did you do?
Yeah. So again, I go back to just the robust teams that are in place to be able to handle things like that on a 24/7 basis. And so watch centers and operation centers that are built with that 24/7 mindset. By the time I left Citi, we had a follow the sun capability even on our threat intelligence team as well.
So we've had Tom Quinn on the show. He's the CISO of T. Rowe Price. And he always talks about just how much cyber is a social thing. You have to have trust. You have to have the ability to communicate what you're doing and try to be an enabler. And I feel like in the 90s, and the early 2000s, cyber was like this brand new field, right? It was very product focused. You had to have a firewall, right? Then an antivirus. Then So how have you seen things change in the finance industry over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, to me, there's a few things there. One is, the management and the processes that had to get built around cyber because it was so new, right? We always talk about the first CISO being Steve Katz at Citibank. And then think about it, that whole industry being born in the mid 1990s. It's not that long ago in relative terms. And then, Tom also, it just reminds me of another interesting thing with the rise of the ISACs at the time. So late 90s, early 2000s, Financial Services ISAC first went out of the gate, October 1999. And back to the social thing, brought up the idea about, hey, community sharing, getting people together with like-minded problems, with the idea of being able to protect the financial sector. It wasn't just about, for example, protecting Citibank. We all agreed that bad security for one bank was bad security for all of them. And if people couldn't trust their money being at a bank, they'd pull it out and wouldn't put it anywhere. Right. So it became an issue for us throughout the whole sector.
Now, just could you expand a little bit more on the FS-ISAC, right? The financial sectors, I think that's the right term.
Financial Services ISAC.
Services ISAC, right? Yeah. Expand a little bit, like who's in that? What do you get to do really? Because I think for a lot of the folks who watch the show who are pretty much cyber startup people, they think in terms of like the FS-ISAC conference, right? Where I'm going to go and meet a bunch of potential buyers at this place. But ISACs are so much more than that. So what else? What does the ISAC do for you specifically?
Yeah, I think I really want to back up to kind of the history and why they even got started in the first place. And so there's this thing happening in the mid 1990s with a presidential commission studying the critical infrastructure in the United States. And one of the things that they find is that much of the critical infrastructure, and you hear numbers like 85%, so 85% of the critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. So if things start breaking, if things stop working, if there's an issue with a critical sector, this becomes a national security priority, a national security issue. So being privately held, there's only so much the government can do. So one of the things that came out of that report was the idea that the private sector needs to do a better job of helping to secure critical infrastructure. And one of those things was establishing an ISAC, or Information Sharing and Analysis Center, with the idea that each sector could work with that within their community to share information with each other, share threat, vulnerability, and really incident information with each other to help be on the lookout for new threats and vulnerabilities. And I always talk about it really being kind of a virtual neighborhood watch program. It's really, if somebody breaks in your house, tell the neighborhood what happened, how it happened, and maybe they can shore up their own house.
And how do you compare sort of that trusted relationship with other ISAC members versus maybe data you get from the government? You might get tips from the NSA, the FBI.
Right.
You might get tips from your vendors, right? Your flashpoints of the world,
Right.
that sort of thing. How do you kind of sort all that and keep that separate?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, think about like when I was sitting at Citibank running threat intelligence for a global organization with 250,000 people. How am I looking at information that's coming from FBI, Secret Service, vendors that we use for intelligence purposes, and then the ISAC? The ISAC to me was always a great initial source because it was current, as real time as you can get, given conditions, and coming from a trustworthy source. And so that to me always became sort of the high priority information that we were getting. This is exactly what people are seeing and dealing with right now, this minute. And I need to see like, hey, have we seen these guys before? Have we been attacked before by this? Or what can we do? What can we do to make sure that we don't become a victim of them?
And is there some familiarity with the folks in the intelligence community and the DoD? Because you hired a lot of people that came from that. So in some cases, you might have, like, they're not sharing top secret, although some people are sharing top secret info, right? So how do you kind of talk about that?
So I think that it's a really neat situation where one of the people that I had early on in the days of the Cyber Threat Intelligence Center over at Citibank, when we were going through that interview and hiring process and bringing on more analysts and more intelligence professionals, yeah, we would go to the DoD or former intelligence community types, and they would be applying for these jobs. And I remember one person that we interviewed and then eventually hired. She had said that when she left military intelligence and got out of the government, she never thought she'd ever be doing anything like it again, and would have to find some other kind of a career. But we were able to take those skills and apply them in a commercial setting.
So I think another interesting question would be then, what do you think of threat intelligence? Because I think at one point, there were two things that happened since we've known each other. At one point, threat intelligence, when we were working at the NSA, we were doing our own research, right? Coming up with the 0 days,
right,
trying to get exploits and stuff like that. And I can remember when you went to work for CSC, right? It was, you were basically, I've got 10 people doing that for me now, right? So that's a different view of threat intelligence. And I think another time when you were at Citibank, I think you had subscribed to every threat intelligence feed.
Yeah, anything that we can get our hands on, right?
So how do you look at threat intelligence and vulnerabilities? How do you view that these days?
Yeah, there's so many options on that, and there were so many players in the beginning days of that. And I think back to, we're talking like 2006 timeframe as threat intelligence is starting to become a more commercial operation, and where we were getting information like that from. It definitely was the early days. And so we were just growing organically and like looking at different sources. And I would look at things just to see like, hey, is there an additive thing that we can get from this particular source that we're not getting anywhere else? And we would just keep piling them on. And then as we got more and more of these, and maybe some of them tended to become a little bit more duplicative, we would definitely evaluate which ones were better than the others. But there wasn't much of that. We pretty much stayed clear of that. But I would say that the other thing there too is just expanded the intelligence types. Like I remember one of the intel firms that we were using came to us one day and said like, hey, we got a whole bunch of credit cards that were sitting on this forum somewhere. Would you be interested in that? And we're like, heck yeah, I think so. I think we can do something with that. And then we basically, I'd say, invented this whole fraud threat intelligence service within Citibank to be able to take stolen, potentially compromised credit cards and get those to the business units within Citibank to make a determination, right? Were they going to shut them down, reissue, whatever, or keep a fraud watch on them? But it became a whole thriving industry. And then suddenly we were buying like millions of credit cards. It was crazy.
So I'm putting words in your mouth, which is always bad for an interviewer to do. But how do you react to the statement, if you're at a Fortune 2000 or bigger, your threat intelligence, your cyber program basically mirrors what the NSA does? You collect, you try to disseminate within your organization, you try to preserve privacy, all that kind of stuff. Did you operate like an intelligence organization?
Yeah, I think so in a lot of ways. We definitely would fit into that category, and just, we follow the same intelligence management lifecycle that appears in the DoD manual, and you can rip that out of that manual and poke it into the training that we do internally.
So it's one thing to talk about vulnerabilities and what the industry's doing there, but Like 9/11 happened when you were at an MSSP, and you've told me that was like the birth of resilience,
Right.
and recovery and all that kind of stuff. So how do you measure that in the finance industry?
And there were definitely a lot of changes made that day where, all of a sudden, the backup systems that were supporting Wall Street were located a few blocks away, and people never thought that anything like that would happen in a geographic area, and suddenly it did. And so resilience, to your point, is born, but 20 plus years later, we're still learning. And I just think about like some of the recent events that have happened. Like most recent one in my mind would be like sort of that the faulty CrowdStrike update from last summer. I mean, all of a sudden, blue screens happening everywhere, people wondering what's going on, and just all of these outages, not just in healthcare, obviously, but airlines having, flight delays, et cetera, and lots of impact across the board. So, yeah, I think that we need to step it up when it comes to resilience and operational capability. And it's not just, and CISOs don't necessarily just have to worry about security. They've got to think about this too. If systems start going down, can I maintain operations?
And it's interesting because we're recording this in October of 25, but we started in the 90s and we saw the birth of Wi-Fi, we saw the birth of virtualization, we saw the birth of mobile, we saw the birth of cloud. Every one of these things is a little bit more resilient than the last thing. But now, if you ask somebody, how does your network work? They're going to be like, well, here's Salesforce, here's all the apps that connect into, and they're never going to draw like the local layer, hardware layer, or things like that.
And firewall, and then everybody else, right?
And it's flat networks and zero trust and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting. So what I want to talk about then is let's start pivoting to the healthcare industry. Tell us what's different about healthcare from finance, and what we should be thinking about this as a critical infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start on the soft side. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I got to Health-ISAC was everybody points to financial services ISAC as being sort of the golden standard of information sharing. There's a lot of great info sharing happening in financial services, and we could talk about some great examples there. When I got to health, I thought it was even better. The spirit, the desire for people to want to work with each other, help each other out is just even so much better in health than it is in finance. And I think it has a lot to do with the mission. There are so many people that are in jobs in health sector, healthcare, because they care about the end user, who's the patient, right? The human being there that we're trying to save, cure, help prevent a disease, et cetera. And they're so mission-oriented that I think it carries over into cyber as well, and people really believe in it. So that's one of the big ones, and a great thing to see from the sharing standpoint. The other thing I alluded to earlier was the budget problem. We definitely have a budget problem in cyber for healthcare.
On the health side.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And health sector's big, and it's got things like medical device manufacturers and health IT organizations and electronic health record software companies. But the majority, when we think about health, we're thinking about healthcare and hospitals and your doctor and things of that sort. And that healthcare side, that health delivery, as we call it, is really where there's a major gap in adequate funding for cyber. And I'm going to go back to the mid-90s again, where I think a lot of that started when HIPAA came out, people focused on compliance, and the big push to digitize medical records. All of that came together, created this perfect storm, and sucked all the money away from cybersecurity, unfortunately.
So one of the things we've been lucky enough to be able to donate to various healthcare organizations and stuff like that, and we try to always sneak in some, do you want some free email security, or do you want some free ADR and stuff like that? And we were constantly told, we want more doctors, more beds,
right,
more stuff like that. So is that going to bite us someday? Because I get that. But is that a good long-term strategy?
It's the constant battle that these organizations face, Ron. I mean, you've got hospitals today that are on razor-thin budgets, right? They're barely making a profit. Most of them are losing money. And it comes down to a budgetary decision, right? Do I buy that new multi-million-dollar MRI to potentially save people? Do I hire more doctors to improve healthcare? Or do I buy that firewall? I know what my answer would be, if I'm going to be at that hospital. I want to make sure I'm getting taken care of. So it's a tough battle. But and this is where I think government can help, and we can talk a little bit maybe about some government assistance at some point. But I think that's where we really need to have government step in to help out with some of this.
So a lot of hospitals have had budgetary concerns, right? A lot of them are funded by their state, their county. A lot of them are funded by their patients, and it's different everywhere you go.
Right.
We're blessed here in Howard County, got a great hospital, and it's an interesting discussion to talk about what does it mean to have a resilient hospital. One of our, I think our joint friends is Josh Corman. He talks a lot about, he's the I am the cavalry guy, among many other things. He talks a lot about how water is the most important thing for hospitals. So do you get into that at ISAC?
Yeah, great question, because since I've been with Health-ISAC now 6 years, we've been doing an industry exercise. We call it the hobby exercise on a yearly basis. And we've been bringing members together in Washington, D.C., along with other representatives from the government, FBI, HHS, FDA, and others to do a sort of a tabletop exercise. This year, we just did this one in June. Interestingly enough, Josh was there, and we had worked with Josh about bringing water to the exercise. So this is the first of those hobby exercises that we've done where we've asked another sector to come in. And so as part of that scenario, it wasn't just, cyber and a weather-related problem that's causing the disruption. Now we've got a water interruption issue. And now what happens now? And so we played that out in a couple of different scenarios. And it was a really interesting conversation.
Is that a public exercise? Can you talk about what you guys found?
Well, we've released the after-action report, which is a public document. And what I would say is, probably not surprisingly, it's a lot of people don't realize the extent of interdependencies with other sectors. Water is a great one because that has an immediate effect. Water goes down in a hospital and services start shutting down, right? Think about the air conditioning for the facility. Think about the operations and medical procedures that are happening. Can't do that without water. How much extra water is contained on site? Versus like with electricity, a lot of organizations have a generator and maybe they've got some huge diesel tanks buried in the ground so they can run on power for a few days, but take water out of the equation and they're out quick.
So it's interesting. I get to meet a lot of people all over the country when it comes to doing these critical infrastructure things. And when I meet somebody from the water industry and they're like, man, we got our act together. Right? There's no way Russia or China could be in here and say, we'll get redundant controls, physical controls, something like. I'm like, great. Would you like to testify before Congress or something that you're unhackable? Right? Because that's really what you're saying, right? And on the other hand, the vast majority of these people don't have the funding to do that. So this kind of reminds me of like the scene from The Incredibles, right? If everybody's super, then nobody's super. If every sector is a critical infrastructure, but water is still ultimately dependent upon power. Is that the way you look at how do you view those?
Water being dependent on power.
Without power, there is no water.
Yeah.
Is that's you talk to a water person and maybe not, right?
Yeah. But I think, like I said, most critical facilities are going to have backup power, and they could probably run for a week or two without power because they've got diesel generators. Yeah, I don't think anybody's storing tons of water around in case water goes out. Yeah, I
think that's what I was looking for. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
So then what do we do, right? Do we tell all the hospitals to build silos and store water, get on well systems? What's the answer there?
Yeah, well, I think that's why Josh Corman's really raising the alarm bells about what's going on in the water sector, where they're understaffed, under-resourced when it comes to cyber. And yeah, we've got to do something about that.
All right. Now, here's the second question. This is where it gets a little bit dicey. Let's assume Josh is right, you're right, water's vulnerable. Besides a terrorist or someone who just wants to take down the United States, like, is China or Russia going to do that against us? Like, that's an act of overt war.
Let's go to all the events with Salt Typhoon and everything that's going on there, right? They're just creating their beachhead and just waiting to act. And I think that's very true. And I think it's a valid issue to worry about.
All right. So then let's take that a step further, which I agree with you.
Yeah.
So then let's get back to the role of government here, right? We probably have a lot more fingers we can talk about and point at the healthcare and, we could be doing this, whatever. But look, they're saving patients, right? their first thought's not cyber and reliability and stuff like that. So what could be done different than what we're doing now? We have a Department of Homeland Security. We have a CISA, at least for a little while.
Right.
We'll see, right?
Yeah.
But, should the local counties be doing more to protect these things? Should the states and their national cyber force people be doing more to assess these people? What do you think should be done, since you've had a lot of exposure to these healthcare organizations across the country?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm reacting to the changes that I've seen since January with the new administration. I am not a fan of pushing cyber to the state and local organizations. I think this is where a centralized government capability is a much better solution, where we've got limited human resources, right? We always say there's not enough people in cyber. So if we're going to push the problem down to the states, how am I going to start hiring cybersecurity professionals in every single state? Like, not picking Idaho, but I will. How am I going to incentivize people to want to take jobs there and stay there, and get the right people on staff there? And to me, it just doesn't make sense. So I think this is where we've really got a central function.
So I'm gonna agree and disagree with you there. Think about the New York Cybercrimes Task Force.
Right.
You had some experience with that. Mostly good, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yep.
Texas just set up something like that in Texas. I think the point I want to make is that cyber needs to be local. And what I need, and what you just said about cyber, it's hard to make it local.
Right.
But it's like, look, if somebody breaks into my house, I call the police.
Right.
If somebody
you're not calling the FBI.
Right, you're not calling the FBI,
Yeah.
right? And if somebody from China breaks into my house, it'd be nice if the local police could help me respond. Because frankly, if somebody from China came over to here, broke in my house physically, I'm still going to call the police.
Right.
And so I just felt like, as much as we've evolved in the last 30 years in IT and cloud and stuff like that, our services that we get from our state and local governments have not kept up.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean they shouldn't have a centralized place, but I do think we should do something.
I think it's a good point, Ron. You kind of convinced me a little otherwise. And, actually one of the quotes I love, or many stories I love talking about is 10 years after 9/11, Ray Kelly, the former NY police commissioner, was doing a 60 Minutes interview about the anti-terrorism capabilities that New York City had implemented, including a global threat intelligence capability where he had New York City police deployed all over the world, countries all over the place. And the interviewer asked him, how can you spend $500 million on this over 10 years? Why would you be doing this? It just sounds ludicrous. And the answer from Ray Kelly was, I'm not waiting around for the federal government to come save us from the next 9/11. So paraphrasing a bit, but I think, it's interesting to see organizations like that might have the capability adequately supported to do things like that. So interesting to see where that might go.
And I think if the counties and the local states, the states knew that they could do more with this, it would. But cyber has never been a political issue in the counties,
right,
and in the states, because but we could be doing a lot more. We do so much with cell phones and licensing. Oh, you want to put a federal, you want to put a cell phone tower up here. You got to do these regular. Well, why not mandate some cybersecurity?
Right.
Why not mandate, if we're going to do clean water, why not do clean internet pipes and things like that? But let me ask you a slightly different question. What if, people are seeing, again, we're recording this in October 25, people are seeing ICE going into cities, right? People are seeing, the Army being deployed to cities and whatnot. Why not deploy the National Guard directly in the cyber assets for these things, directly into hospitals and frankly, places like Citibank? I mean, you already have folks from DHS and the IRS there.
Right.
Why not Cyber Command people right there on the front lines?
I think ultimately it comes down to resources, and I think it just demonstrates how tough a problem it is. It's difficult for somebody who even might be a cybersecurity expert to go walking into a hospital or city for that reason, for that matter, and understand truly about how their network works, how things operate, where the priorities are. It takes a long time to get people up to speed like that. And the other thing I was thinking about also was even the cybersecurity resources at the hospitals. I think one of the telling things when I got, again, early days for me in Health-ISAC 6 years ago, I was talking to a CISO from a hospital system not far from here. And that person said to me that they had been there 6 months and they were the first CISO that hospital system had ever had. And I was really struggling to understand that because coming from financial services, you had to have a CISO. It was part of the regulation, but not necessarily in health. And it just demonstrates the gap that we have where we don't even necessarily have the people doing information security at a lot of these organizations.
So finishing up some high level questions, right? Now, you were a pen tester at the NSA. You did threat for Citibank. You're helping the Health-ISAC, being chief security officer there. Where do you sort of put the blame for these issues? Is it the consumer? Is it the vendors? Like if you could fix one thing that would make things better, what would that be?
Right. Again, I'll go back to the thing I talked about earlier about budget and resource. So I do think it's a 30-year-old stigma that this sector got stuck with, where HIPAA came out. They're quickly trying to move to electronic health records at the same time. Focus was on compliance, visibility, not necessarily security, and that just stuck. And then what's happened in the past 10 years, we've had this very unfortunate thing called ransomware that's been getting a little bit of attention. I'm saying jokingly, but causing serious issues for organizations and hospitals. And that seemed to be the changing point where people finally started paying attention, like, wow, we've got to start beefing up security.
Would you rather have more people be aware of cyber? Like, would you rather have a bunch of great IT people that knew a little bit about cyber, or would you have more people who were experts in cybersecurity? What would help the industry the most?
Yeah, I think given what's going on right now, I'd probably go for the IT people that knew a little bit about cyber, because that's one of the biggest gaps. Again, it's one of the things that we face with Health-ISAC, where we've got small, medium businesses that have no one on security. And so how can we make services available to organizations like that to help them out? I mean, I kid you not, that one of the organizations I talked to, besides being head of IT and worrying about all the infrastructure and security, this guy mows the lawn once a week in the summer. So it just shows you like how small these organizations are and how cash strapped they are.
So again, going back to pen testing, very manual process, consulting, very manual process, doing all the work you did in the finance, very manual processes. How does AI change our entire industry? What have you seen change so far with AI?
Well, it's really exciting. I mean, there's so many neat things going on with all of that. And I think just even when we look at the healthcare applications itself and AI, it's just really wonderful things that are coming and are very promising to help improve people's lives. I mean, better diagnosis, earlier detection of diseases, better patient care, all these just phenomenal things. And then closer to home for me in cybersecurity, I've definitely seen AI being applied to like cybersecurity operations, security operations centers taking advantage of this stuff. And even closer to me on the threat intelligence side, all my old stuff that I've been doing, just helping out the analysts do their jobs better, pulling sources together, writing stuff up faster.
Do you believe in the quip, AI makes a level 1 analyst like a level 2 analyst? Like, did you see that personally?
I think the other quote that I heard was treat AI like an intern, right? We can get the work out of them, but you got to verify it and validate it all. Yeah.
An intern is great at coding and great at art and great at telling jokes, and it's just whatever. By the way, V-Ron has some technical issues, so he's not making an appearance today.
I almost thought I'd have to leave because of that.
All right, so I'm going to put this slide up here. I'm going to start giving you some questions. And so the first question that we're going to close out here is, what is the correct acronym for the health standard that everybody knows as HIPAA?
I was sitting here thinking, I'm
putting you on the spot.
I know, right? It's the first one.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, it's the first one.
You are correct. Yeah. You are correct, right?
Yeah.
So how often do you, hear things said in the course of your job today? Oh, HIPAA says this, HIPAA does that, or we don't have the money to do that. Like how much is HIPAA impacting what you do?
I think like where I'm coming across it is really sort of what do the new HIPAA guidelines look like potentially, right? So there's been a lot of conversation at the end of the Biden administration. There was some draft HIPAA updates that focused on cybersecurity that was pretty extensive and pretty difficult to accomplish, in my opinion. But I saw it as a start, and I think back to the statement you had before about like, hey, can we establish minimum cybersecurity guidelines? I mean, this was serious conversation at the end of the Biden administration about what could we potentially do in the health sector and coming up with minimum standards. So there's some voluntary guidelines that are out there that we can point people to, but it's not been made mandatory.
And where do you see HIPAA in the scheme of like NIST cybersecurity framework, CMMC, PCI? Is it the Coast Guard? No disrespect to you know what I mean? Does it get like looked down upon by other standards?
No, I would definitely not say that. It's another dimension within healthcare. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Another trivia. What movie is this from?
I'm going to say Die Hard 4.
Oh, one more guess. Come on, one more guess.
Oh man.
I'll give you a hint. The guy on the right is John Travolta.
Oh.
Halle Berry was in this movie.
Yeah.
Classic hacking movie. All right, you should know it. I'm putting you on the spot. So this was Swordfish, right? Swordfish. How much when we were at NSA, we'd all go see the hacker movies, right? I remember we seeing the Sandra Bullock movie, The Net, where somebody hacked her Cessna, which had no computers on it.
Wasn't there an IP address of like 500 or something
like that? Yeah. What are some of the biggest misconceptions, you being a cyber guy, that people come to you and say, well, can you fix this for me, Mr. Cyber Wizard?
Misconceptions that Hollywood has caused? Hollywood
or whoever, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, I was watching your Bobby V. De Niro Netflix update on 0 Day, and I thought that was spot on. It's just like the idea that one cyber attack could cause so much havoc across multiple critical infrastructures, like taking airplanes down, causing cars to crash. I mean, it's just kind of ludicrous.
How did you feel, since we did a whole interview on this, right? How did you feel about them suspending habeas corpus just to go after the cyber terrorists?
Yeah, like I said, we saw how well the Patriot Act worked out with that too. So, yeah, I mean, pretty daring.
All right, I'm going to give you this last one's an easy one. What movie is this from?
That's Sneakers.
And very, very good. I can remember seeing Sneakers when we were at the fort, and this movie was way ahead of its time, right? I mean, they had technology to decrypt anything, didn't necessarily get you everything. And I think it's interesting. So how often with the healthcare stuff, I mean, we're trying to be HIPAA compliant, but is anybody saying we have to be quantum resistant, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So what are they saying there?
Yeah, on quantum, it's definitely a conversation, but I've had conversations about this with people in healthcare, a lot of conversations, obviously, and then I talked to some colleagues in the financial services sector. They're taking it serious in finance, and they're doing work today on that. Health, again, I think it's going to be budget and resource constraint issues where they're basically saying, yeah, sounds like a problem I ought to be concerned about, but you know what? I got 1,000 other things ahead of that, and I am literally kicking the can down the road to the next person that can worry about it. Unfortunately, I think that's what's happening. I see some traction in subsectors like medical device manufacturers and some of the big pharma companies are taking it a little bit more seriously. So I think we're a little behind there, unfortunately.
I still want to meet a governor who's running on a platform like, oh, I'm going to raise taxes to buy quantum-resistant storage for all the hospitals, right? Cyber just doesn't resonate with
it
doesn't resonate with the public. But speaking of resonating with the public, this is your LinkedIn profile. You do I've seen you talk a lot of places. It's October Cybersecurity Awareness Month. How do people get in contact with you other than LinkedIn? Because your job is to kind of be an ambassador for Health-ISAC, right?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's a great place to start. So I would definitely point people there. Health-ISAC, we do a lot of work in terms of trying to raise awareness across the health sector globally, what's happening in cybersecurity issues there. And so the Health-ISAC page that you might have out there, but that's another place to just find out more information about us as well.
Cool. Well, Errol, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate sitting down. We can't tell all the stories from the NSA.
I know, right?
There were many. There was a lot of Mountain Dew was had before 10 a.m., which was good. Any final words?
Yeah, I think it's just so great to be here with you. We've shared so many great things in our NSA lives. And I was, just thinking about movies in general, just another fun point. I was hoping you'd ask me about war games. but that didn't come up. But there's a great book. It's Fred Kaplan wrote called Dark Territory. Chapter 1 is all about war games and the influence that movie actually had on President Ronald Reagan. You got it back there somewhere?
No.
So the movie War Games had on President Ronald Reagan, came back to Washington, D.C. after watching it right after it came out and asked his staff, I saw this movie and it made me really scared and I'm concerned that this might happen to us. Is it possible? And they were like, we have no idea. We'll come back and tell you later. Of course, they came back and said, it's much worse than we think. So that gave rise to cybersecurity standards across the government at the time. And that book, again, mentions the pit where Ron and I worked. So little shout out to NSA there. So good stuff.
That's good. I'll put that in the notes. And that's a great memory. I enjoyed that book too. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Once again, this is Errol Weiss, Chief Security Officer for the Health-ISAC. I'm Ron Gula. I hope you have a great week. Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, give us a like and subscribe. Have a great week.